Our big thing right now is we lead with speed and efficiency as kind of our calling card, but there's so many different angles that we can take. You mentioned like the compliance side of it. That's not a card that we play too often, but it's very relevant to what we do, just making sure that there's consistency throughout the process.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to human resources innovators about innovation in the world of HR. If you're a people leader or you're looking for a new way to think about how to help others be successful, this is the podcast for you. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, I'm extremely excited for the conversation today. We got an awesome guest, Darrian Mikell. He is the CEO and co-founder at Qualifi. It's a SaaS platform that powers the fastest phone interview experience in the world and helps recruiting teams hire great candidates faster than ever before. Graduated from Indiana Wesleyan University with a bachelor's degree in Entrepreneurship and Finance. He was a two-sport athlete in both basketball and track and field and was a national champ in the long jump. He is based in the Indy area and is a dedicated husband and father of three. Welcome to the show, Darrian.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate the intro there.
Absolutely. Well, I'm always excited to talk to innovators, entrepreneurs, people helping solve problems in the world of HR. That's really what we're all about. And so why don't we start off by talking just a little bit about your background and what led you to look at solving recruiting problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider myself obviously starting this company, an entrepreneur first and foremost. My style of entrepreneurship is looking at problems that I've experienced myself. So that's how Qualifi came to be. Was prior to this, I was at another startup company called Viral Launch. It is in the e-commerce space. We helped Amazon sellers launch and grow their businesses and provided a variety of tools to them. But my responsibility there was as a one-man ops team for most of my time there. So lots of people wear multiple hats in a startup company, and I wore quite a few, and they're mostly in the back office area. So as you mentioned, my background's in finance as well. So I kind of assumed that role. And then as we started to grow, just took on the different, logistical things like the general admin and legal stuff. And then also as we started to hire people, the HR and recruiting responsibilities fell on my plate as well. And so that's how I got into this world of HR. And I tend to find that like most HR people kind of have similar, not necessarily similar stories, but they stumble into it,
I did.
So yeah, that's the same for me. So I stumbled into it, and just by having those different responsibilities, juggling a lot of different things, I recognized a few areas where I needed some more efficiency. And one of those was the phone interview. And that's what we've set out to solve in this first phase of Qualifi.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, yeah, and I feel you with the statement. I like to tell people, HR found me.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I wasn't really looking for it. Now, I should step back and say, I know a number of professionals now, like HR has become, it's kind of come into its own, right? Like it's actually like a college major now. You can actually do that. But when I was going to school, that wasn't a choice, right? It was, I got the job because I was in ops, and they were like, hey, we need someone to do this. Here's HR. Now go hire 90 people for the holiday season.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Imagine me like coming in, like when I started to take that on, it was maybe 2 or 3 years out of college. And prior to that, I probably can admit that I didn't really know what HR was, so
there's no shame in that. The best part is the friends I grew up with, when I tell them I'm in human resources, and they just laugh and they're like, what? You? But, yeah, we work through that.
yeah, exactly. You're the one that's hired.
All right, so I want to dig into this a little bit, just to understand, kind of what Qualifi does and how it works. So, phone screens. It's one of those areas where, I was very fortunate. The company that I started with was one of the largest retailers in the United States. They had a really, really structured, program and protocol for interviewing. Like, I got really fortunate that I had really good training to start with. But still, when you get on that phone interview, it's kind of like, okay, what am I doing again? And what questions should I ask? And what if they give me this, a weird response? And it is one of those situations where you kind of learn as you go, and every conversation is so drastically different. And so, I'm fascinated to understand how your system works, because just with the nature of phone screens being how they are, I don't know how you systemize that and make that more efficient. So what is your approach to kind of solving the phone interview problem?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess to what you were saying before, like not a lot of people do get the training. So it's good that you at least had like some foundation that you know, started with. But no, to answer your question, I'm going to probably make it sound more complicated than what it actually is. Our system is a automated phone interview platform. A lot of people may be, especially with your audience, may be familiar with video interviewing. We have a similar approach, but we make the transaction of the interview happen over an actual phone call instead of a web-based system. And so recruiters are able to go into our system and pre-record their own voice asking their set of questions. Usually I've found that most recruiters have a scripted list of questions that they ask given each role. So they're able to go in and record those questions again with their own voice. So it creates these personal yet standardized interviews that they can then scale up their efforts from. So we typically work with higher volume recruiters. So people doing this hundreds of times a week per month, interviewing hundreds or thousands of candidates a month. And so we're able to help them remove this big bottleneck by allowing them to set up these interviews, and then they can invite candidates at scale. So the invites happen as a text or an email to the candidate. The candidate will receive an invitation saying, hey, we received your application for this, this company and this role. We'd love to learn more about you. We also want this to be a convenient experience for you. So we pre-recorded these questions. So click this link to get started. And that takes them to an instructional page where they can read through how to navigate through the interview, which is basically if they can navigate a voicemail, then they can navigate a qualified interview. It's pretty similar and just as easy. But ultimately, when they're ready, their number's either programmed in already, or they can type their phone number into those instructions and then hit start, confirm. Our system then dials their phone directly. They pick up and answer those questions over a phone call. So they can do it over a cell phone, over a landline. It doesn't matter. We give that access to them and they can respond at their convenience. 11 o'clock at night, 3 a.m. in the morning, whenever is convenient for their schedule, we allow for that. And it makes it an instantaneous experience for, both sides. So hopefully that clarified, how it all works. Yeah. Happy to dig in, a little bit more.
That's it. So, gosh, I wish I would have known about this about 15 years ago when it was going through, what I call like the Groundhog Day, where it's like you've got this list of questions you ask everybody, yep. and in this corporation and in that corporation, you had to ask every single question, because they were afraid of, a lawsuit because you were, treating one candidate favorably versus another, and you had to take all these notes and. Yeah, so geez, it would have been nice to hit the easy button, but
that's how I felt when I was doing it. Like I said, I was a rookie. I was a rookie doing this, and I think I got lucky in the sense of stumbling into this thought process because I did have a scripted list of questions. I Googled those questions at first and what should I be asking candidates? And then I found like something I felt really good with that covered the things I need to know at the screening level. And so I was just like, all right, these are the 7 questions I'm going to ask every candidate. And then as I was doing this, with the coordination, the scheduling that goes into it, and then me just saying the same things over and over again, I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this, and I didn't really see anything out there. So that was kind of the aha moment to jump into this and get started with it.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting approach. It's one of those things that, I work for a smaller company now. It's one of those challenges that we're definitely trying to solve is, okay, how do I get good candidates? How do I make sure I give every candidate a fair shake? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think one of the challenges is with some of the, I know there's all these like screening questions you can ask, right? So it's like, how many years of experience do you have? If it's less than 5, okay, the candidate gets kicked out. Or, where does the candidate live? Or what's their location preference or whatever. And then there's all these knockout questions. But, I tried that a number of years ago. And what I was finding is I was missing all these wonderful candidates because it was like on a technicality, right? Yeah. So it's like, if I had a location screening question and the question was something along the lines of, do you want to, work within a 20-mile radius of,
and they're like 21 miles
and they're
away.
like 21, exactly, right? It's like, oh, the geofence was 1 mile out, so I just lost like the perfect candidate.
Yeah.
So I got rid of a lot of them. But then the next problem was, okay, now I got all these candidates, and there are some candidates that are unqualified
Yeah.
that I don't want a hiring manager to be speaking with. But there's a number of candidates that could be qualified. And the only solution that we've been able to do is have somebody physically do that work. So as you're thinking through the system, and as you're shifting from conducting the interview into actually screening the responses, how does your tool approach that process?
Yeah, the experience. So I explained like how the candidates basically interact with our platform and take their interview. What happens on the other side is, as soon as they're done with the interview, we have recorded the audio of that response. We also automatically transcribe those responses as well and make it available to the recruiting team to listen to. And so our big thing right now is we lead with speed and efficiency as kind of our calling card, but there's so many different angles that we can take. You mentioned like the compliance side of it. That's not a card that we play too often, but it's very relevant to what we do, just making sure that there's consistency throughout the process. And I can go on and on about the different features. I'm not here to sell, but
Sure.
The recruiter side then is they'll be able to review those candidates similar to listening to a podcast or listening to music. They don't have to listen to themselves talk anymore. It's the way it's structured is we chop it up question by question, so they can jump forward to any specific point in the interview that they want. So an example there is maybe start date availability or whatever their compensation expectations. If you ask those sorts of questions, then you can, if you're really strict on those responses, if you really need them to be within a 20-mile radius and that's the question you're asking, you can jump straight to that question and listen to that first. You can also skim through the responses with the transcriptions. You can play in multi-speeds as well if you're, a power listener and want to, double up, what you're able to listen to. And then ultimately right now, the rating system is a quick thumbs up or thumbs down in terms of passing or, moving a candidate on to the next steps. We also make it really easy for you to share with hiring managers. The primary users are recruiters. They can also easily email or forward a link or download the transcriptions and share those. So it kind of replaces or supplements the notes that they might take on that candidate. And it allows the hiring team to be more collaborative on how they make decisions. Oftentimes it's recruiters summarizing that call and then passing those notes along. And sometimes that can be hard for a hiring manager to make a decision on, and then they might have to do a phone screen after. So this kind of synthesizes, condenses some steps potentially. It makes it easy for people to collaborate.
Got it. No, that's cool. Yeah, it's it's a really interesting approach, and I think about one of the biggest challenges in recruiting is it's just so time sucking. I mean, it just takes so much out of you, and it's I was in a conversation and we were talking about I think we're gonna have to hire 30 people in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And all my brain can think through is, okay, 30 times how many interviews, And I think the other thing that's really challenging is the fact that, and I'm sure you've got the statistics that you could pull out there, but everything you look at it's all about speed, right? And especially now with the labor market where it's at, you can't wait a week to respond to a candidate. You can't wait 2 days because they might already be halfway through, an interview process with another company that had a great, just got lucky and saw the application came in and called them right away, or had some sort of a solution to just make a connection right away, like a text, whatever. And so, what's really interesting to me about this is it's the on-demand aspect. So are you seeing your customers and your clients kind of see a value there as it relates to the speed of hire?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's why we lead with that, because we believe in both, obviously speed for efficiency's sake, but also the quality. The way I break it down to most people is, if you think just logically, if you really want a candidate, especially if you're in a competitive market, it's likely that someone else is going to want that same candidate. And so you are going to set yourself up in the best position to get your best people by being faster than everyone else. So I was telling that same story pre-pandemic, when the unemployment was kind of flipped. It's about speed, especially with shortages of candidates. You want to be able to move faster. Unfortunately, you still have processes that you have to go through in order to feel comfortable with making your best hiring decisions. And so that's where it's like kind of the chicken and egg, like what should we do? And the phone interview is a common step in that process that people, on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. It's usually a short interaction. It's like, hey, let's jump on the phone real quick and learn more about each other. But what people don't realize is that when you're doing that with, a bunch of candidates at once, there's a lot of communication that goes into it, that coordination, scheduling, looking multiple days out. We've heard over and over, by the time that scheduled date for the interview that we were supposed to have, that candidate's already taken a job, or they're out of the market, or they no show, and you have to go through that process again. And so, the on-demand piece makes it a lot faster. And what we tend to find is that making it convenient for the candidates allows them to take it or, complete it much faster. So we usually see same day responses through the platform, which has been really, really exciting, on this side of it, to see how people interact and how fast things come back through the platform.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And I'm just reflecting back on some of my recruiting successes, and a few of them, quite frankly, I'm going to bust myself out here, but and this is not my current employer, but at one of my past companies, a couple of my best hires were just pure luck that I just happened to be on the recruiting platform, like within 5 minutes of them applying. And I just happened to have like a free 10 minutes to call them and just do like an impromptu, like phone conversation. Yeah. And they told me after the fact, they're like, you guys were just the first offer I got. And I got a bunch of calls after you guys hired me, but I had already taken this job. And, and the companies they were telling me were like
big names, that
super big names, we would have lost out on this candidate so hard. Like, there's no way we would have landed this candidate, but part of that, that competitive edge in recruiting, it is a little bit cutthroat. If you're not, if you don't have that speed, or you don't have some sort of an edge, then it does come down to luck, right? So, make a little bit of luck by being smart about your processes, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot that goes into hiring people. Obviously, the offer matters, just as a, one instance, but I don't think you're doing yourself justice if you have a long drawn out process. And some people might just leave just because they're like, this is frustrating. People, especially with the way things are today, and in e-commerce and what have you, people just expect clean, fast, enjoyable experiences, and that's not often what you get in a hiring process. And so,
absolutely. I remember, it's funny because I've kind of seen it both ways, where, I started my career a little bit before the Great Recession, and, in the Great Recession, we were still hiring a lot, but it wasn't like this. There were plenty of job seekers. I would say at least it was kind of evenly balanced. Yeah. Job seekers and employers all kind of were on the same footing. Now it's I tell people, if you think about it in the analogy of real estate, it's when the real estate market's hot and there's no houses on the market, you can't find the house you want. You can't, you really can't. And if you do, you're going to pay for it. I think it's basically the same thing in the hiring market right now. If you're an employer and you need a specific skill set and a person that has those skills, it's going to be really hard to find it. And if you do, you're going to pay for it. So it's kind of, just like in real estate, if you don't get on that list and get that house listing, pre-listing, the day before, right now is a great example. You can't buy that house if you wait 2 days.
Oh yeah.
You're competing against 5 offers. Right. And people are buying houses without even walking in them. Right. It's crazy. But that's what it is in recruiting right now. So, get on the pre-list. Get the candidate wholesale.
Yeah, exactly.
And now a word from our sponsors. When Molly, Patrick, and I started to figure out how to start our own podcast, we didn't know where to start. Thankfully, we found Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout makes it super easy for us to upload our episodes, track our listeners, and get listed on all the major podcast networks. Today's a great day to start your own podcast. I know that you're one of our listeners, so you've definitely got something to say. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in all the major podcast directories within minutes of finishing your recording. Podcasting isn't that hard when you have the right partner, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. And now, for listeners of Rebel HR, you can get a $20 Amazon gift card sent to you from Buzzsprout by clicking in the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Are you looking to grow your personal brand or your business brand? Take it from me that podcasts are a great way to do it. Here's the secret. We all want to feel connected to the brands that we buy from. What better way to humanize a brand than through sharing your personal story on a podcast? I have had great success with Kitcaster. Kitcaster is a podcast booking agency that specializes in developing real human connections through podcast appearances. And let me tell you, it's all about the right human connection. You can expect a completely customized concierge service from their staff of communication experts. Kitcaster is your secret weapon in podcasting for business. Your audience is waiting to hear from you. For a limited time offer, listeners to the Rebel HR podcast can go to www.kitcaster.com/rebel to get a special offer for friends of the podcast. Rebel on.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And you know, this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
I think people are oftentimes like afraid of automation in certain contexts, especially when you're talking about like this is a very human experience and a human interaction that you're facilitating. And so people are often, especially in context of what we do, often sometimes like leery of that. But one, I think the pandemic has shown that people are getting more and more used to virtual experiences overall. And again, like think about the pros and cons, like what you're sacrificing by not like if you're not going to do things that are like automating a process and still creating a seamless experience, your competitors are, so like they're actively working to set themselves up for better success by being faster and ultimately, landing those better candidates.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and I wanted to explore that a little bit because there's so much kind of noise and I would say kind of fears of like AI and the like taking the human out of the process and all that kind of stuff. And so do you use like is it AI technically? I mean, how does that?
Yeah,
how does that work?
So right now, actually no, we are. And we actually get really good feedback on the pure utilitarian nature of what we do. We're creating an experience that allows convenience for candidates, and then the recruiters can do their job well. Their job isn't necessarily to coordinate and schedule everything. Their job is to, evaluate and make better hiring decisions. And then they have other projects that they're trying to get to that screening and the things that go into screening kind of bog them down in terms of their schedule. So we just make that piece easy. We are excited about the potential of what AI can bring to the table. But right now we're just making that experience faster and more convenient. And so, yeah, I mean, we share similar fears around the negative aspects of AI, especially in the context of recruiting. For us, like we are, internally as a company, as we want to grow and build out our ranks, we want to do so with thoughtfulness. We care about diversity, and we want to live that out in how we create the product as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of evidence of how the existing, capabilities of AI reinforce or create bias, as opposed to solving for it. And so I think that we want to approach that area, with, thoughtfulness.
Absolutely. No, I mentioned this earlier, the whole like screening questions and these knockout questions that you can do in an applicant system. One of my biggest fears, not dissimilar to the AI fear, is the impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you're requiring everybody to get a 4-year degree, but you really don't need a 4-year degree, you just would like to have one, and that's a knockout question. You just adversely, whether you like it or not, and this is going to make all the compliance people bristle, but you just adversely impacted an entire group of people, right? There's
100%.
There's a word for that, and the EEOC doesn't like it. So, so like when you're setting up these knockout questions, you got to be careful. But what I think is really interesting, and full disclosure, I didn't really know anything about Qualifi before we hit record here, so I'm learning along with all you listeners. But my biggest question or concern was, how is this automated phone screening process screening work? Like, does it cause that? But what I'm hearing is it's still a human experience. You're still actually screening the individual.
Yeah. And what we have from day one said was, we want to make this really frictionless. So we don't want the candidate to have to jump through a ton of hoops to participate. We also don't have a robotic voice. It is the recruiter's voice, and usually that is the next person that candidate gets to interact with. And so it's still creating this cohesiveness, and through the design and how we lay out the product, we want it to be really engaging and, like I said, easy to use. But yeah, keeping the human at the center. We want the candidate to showcase their voice. It's an opportunity for them to, express themselves how they want to. And we try to coach our recruiters during the onboarding process to take the questions that they typically ask, but make it engaging, weave their, the narrative of their company and the job into those questions. It is different than a live interview, but they're still able to maintain a lot of those elements of a human interaction. And our goal isn't to remove the human out of the equation. It's to get the recruiter to be able to spend the most time with the most qualified people and still have those, again, it's typically a live interview after, the step in the process that we occupy. And so helping them to get there faster so they can spend that time with them most appropriately.
Yeah, it's really an interesting idea, and I like that approach. And yeah, it's fascinating. So, but it would be cool to have an interview with a robot, right?
No, there's definitely some cool things out there on the horizon. I think would be awesome to have more some different dynamic experiences within that call. And one of the funny things, I don't think this spills too many secret sauce things, but having voices that everyone recognizes, in the platform, celebrities and things of that nature, I think could be cool, but obviously not the priority right now.
My Google, I think, it's a Google Home. That's what our house is. And at one point we could have had John Legend be the voice of, Google or whatever.
Really
now
set the mood.
I don't know. We tried it and it was a little bit too on the nose. It was just a little bit weird. So now it's some Australian voice, which is fun. It's very,
lively.
It's fun. And then I get to practice my Australian accent, which could use some work.
Yeah.
We've really been diving into the tool, and I appreciate you going into it. I certainly spent a lot of time in my career recruiting, and many of us listening to this do get to spend a lot of time on phones with candidates. And it is one of those critical, one of those critical areas where HR can add value, right? Bringing in the right people is one of the most important things we do, period.
Oh, yeah.
But I want to peel back a little bit more and talk a little bit about your company. As a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you've got a really interesting perspective that I think will be helpful for our listeners to hear. So what is it like to start a company while also balancing, the demands of building a growing family and being Darrian?
It is not easy. the beginnings of Qualifi specifically were some of the most challenging. If you go back a couple steps, so the company I mentioned that I was at prior to Qualifi was Viral Launch. And if this gives you any light into me, my personality, mentality around everything, when I joined Viral Launch, the CEO was a friend of mine. There was revenue coming in, so there was like at least some element of security there, but it was very much a startup. My wife was 7 months pregnant with our first child.
Wow.
I was coming from a large corporate organization to the startup with some early revenue. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so I left there. I think I had my second kid while I was there as well. And there's just, I told you I was wearing multiple hats and, trying to juggle startup life and family life. I now have a third child that I've had since starting Qualifi. And so the beginnings of Qualifi were really challenging because I was trying to basically bootstrap it myself. I have the privilege of, working alongside my brother. So that's a pretty cool aspect of Qualifi, is that we have actually a couple siblings in the mix. So me and my brother are the original co-founders, and we got to start this together. But in the early days, there was no funding. We had no customers. We had this idea that was not very proven in the market. So we were trying to get people to believe us on all sides. So money was really hard to come by in the earliest days, but we had to get early believers on both the customer side. And that led to us being able to get some investors to believe in us, to like float us checks here and there to, stretch us along. So basically living check to check as a company, and then also as a person is not a good recipe for a zenful mindset. So I'd say like that was one of the more challenging areas of growth in the company. So we started in 2019, so early 2019, went through a pandemic. So yeah, like we could dig in any of those areas, but that kind of gives a lens into at least the beginnings. And yeah, my kids are 5, 3, and 1, and so there's never a dull moment in our house. And we also are we're fostering a 13-year-old right now. So
wow.
there's a lot of there's a lot going on, just to say that all at once. I think time management is probably one of the most challenging areas, one of the areas that I continuously evaluate, hence Qualify, in the first place. But yeah, would be happy to I can go on and on in different areas about that, but yeah, happy to drill in.
I think, first of all, kudos for taking on the stress of a foster. That's just, good for you for being a support for a child that needs it. But but you certainly don't seem to shy away from stress.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Like my nature is, how do I say this? I generally don't get stressed out too much. I've learned that that's not true. I used to think I was kind of Superman in that regard. Like, yeah, nothing really phases me. Things do phase me. Like, especially, like I said, those early times of Qualify, there was a lot that like brought me a decent amount of anxiety and stress and just worry. But my mentality is kind of just like, this is the reality. It's not necessarily worth dwelling on. Like, let's just figure out what are the next steps to take. So I don't really try to be too bogged down by worrying about what might happen. I just try to all right, here's the situation. What do we do next? And how do we, if it is a negative situation, how do we work ourselves out of it? What are the actions that we need to take from here? And so that's my general approach to everything. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what a great mindset. And so, my next question, as you're building your company, as you're growing your team, growing your business, how are you instilling that mentality and that focus into the kind of the culture of your team at Qualifi?
Yeah, I think a lot of the culture that we're building stems from past experiences in terms of like what we've enjoyed in previous work situations, and what we want to foster even more, and what we want to avoid. Culture is really just a kind of set of commonly accepted rules that you as a group agree on, and so we're we're continuously forming that. We're a team of 8 right now. And so culture really before that was just like, hey, like me and the founders, me and my brother share a lot of similarities, personality wise, and just beliefs, our belief system just from how we grew up. And so I think there's different ways that that's been influenced. And I think it's still yet to grow. As we continue to bring on more people, we want to be really conscious of how that's being shaped. So we have some, basic, guiding mission and kind of guiding values, but we also want to actively kind of create what that system of beliefs is in terms of rules and like how we operate beyond just like, here's like the themes around us, so.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Nice. And so the other question, so that I find interesting, I think it's a 2-part question. So, in the middle of, kind of the world going through the pandemic and people realizing, we need to do something different. I got to believe you were, just started this startup and you're thinking, oh, what does the future hold? How did you work through that? And then I think the second part of the question is, my assumption is you probably got busier than you thought you would because people realized, oh, this is the new normal. This is the new world we live in. So we better figure out ways to be faster and adapt to the virtual world.
Yeah, there's a few things that happened as a result of the pandemic and social issues that were going on during the pandemic. And I think some of those things are still like playing out. So one, as I mentioned, like we were still in that getting people to believe in this concept phase, early on. And so there, in terms of the impact to our business, it was probably a net neutral. Like nothing happened for the better or worse, like during the peak of the pandemic, because our name wasn't out there as much. People weren't familiar with the concept of what we bring to the table. But as things started to, like, people started to get at least a better understanding of what was going on, what their needs were, budgets started to be like less locked down. That's when we started to really build up our business the way that we are now, because hiring started happening again. People had a little bit more lay of the land. So yeah, like, and I think the positives that came from it, at least in terms of our business, at least, is that people, like I said, are getting more and more used to these virtual experiences. Phone screens were already contactless in nature, but still like this virtual way, or this different approach to it. It made candidates a little bit more used to that sort of experiences and open to those experiences. And then another thing that we bring to the table is just our ability to help with the structure, the consistency, which can lead to, a better way to approach objective hiring decisions. So mitigating bias to a degree. So we remove that visual layer, allow people to compare candidates, apples to apples. And as people at least vocally express that they wanted to do different things to have better diversity within their ranks, I think that is something, like I said, that's still emerging as how we can do that, and how companies are actually proactively going about, facilitating that. But that's something that I see as, a positive that kind of came from that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's still so much work, to do in that. And it just, there's, humans have these inherent biases, and, as focused as we are on it, every recruiter has to continually ask themselves, am I doing, am I doing something here that could be unintentionally impacting, somebody because of how I feel about, a certain group. That's just how our brains work, right? So it's like,
it's very small nuances too. Like we were just yesterday, hopefully I don't expose anybody by saying this. Like we're interviewing for folks to add to our team, and like one thing I told myself, and I told, the other folks that were in the interview room, like I said, I'm trying to proactively ignore the fact that this person's energy level was not, what I would hope it would be in an interview. The person answered the questions like really great, but they also like maybe seemed nervous, or like we were trying to like maybe evaluate like if they're nervous or shy, or are they always like that sort of stuff. But one, ultimately, you have to evaluate, is that a key part of their job, and if not, then how should that affect our decision? Like they answered all the questions a certain way, and like we really enjoyed those questions, the way they answered those questions. But it's like small stuff like that, though, where you could have a bias towards people with high energy, and that doesn't necessarily make them a better candidate for the role. And so I think we have to kind of check a lot of those things and really understand, like, all right, what are we hiring for? What are the responsibilities of this role? Let's make sure we are on the same page about what these questions are and how we're going to evaluate them to best approach that.
100%. One of the best hires I ever made came walking into the interview, like blue hair, long hair. It was a male with long hair, unshaven, ripped jeans, and terrible interview. I mean, by all accounts and standards, like hardly answered the questions, But I mean, the questions were answered sufficiently, but certainly not in a way that was like, wow, this is our next,
this is the one.
this is our next all-star. But it was one of those situations where it's like, oh, it was good enough. We'll just hire this person. And within like 3 months, they were like leading the cell that they were in, and like telling people how to do it. And they picked up on, I mean, they learned like a sponge, and it was like, but it was exactly what you just described. And it was one of those situations where, and I think a lot of us in HR can relate to this. Like, we like people who are like us. That's natural. Mm-hmm. That's a human condition. And, typically people in HR, we like to converse, and we're, pretty natural conversationalists, and we generally like people, hopefully.
Hopefully.
but that person and that job did not require that in any way, shape, or form. That job allowed whoever, it didn't matter how good of a conversationalist you were, as long as you could interpret what the job needed done and get it done and align people to get it done with you, like you were golden, right?
Yeah.
But great example where it's like those, those initial biases that can pop in, you got to kind of actively pop that bubble. So kudos for you for checking that.
Like for me, like I joke with a buddy of mine, because we worked together. My first job out of school, he actually helped get me the job. I'm like, we laugh about how I got hired, because when my manager interviewed me, I was a terrible interviewee. I answered all the questions just like straight down the middle. Like, are you a detail oriented person or a big picture thinker? And I'm like, a little bit of both. Like exactly what you're not supposed to do in an interview.
Yeah.
I was honest. I really feel that way, but terrible interviewee. But yeah.
Well, I like to say, I mean, you know what a good interview means, and the response is that means they're a good interviewer. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best fit or employee. You gotta work through that, right? And I think any recruiter would agree with that. We've all been fooled before. So, well, this has just been an awesome conversation. I appreciate you digging in and giving us a little bit of insight into the world of Qualifi. So we're going to shift gears and we're going to go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. So, you ready?
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, first question. What is your favorite people book?
Yeah, I think this falls into the people book category. It's a book by Simon Sinek called Leaders Eat Last. It's actually been a few years since I read it, but I think one of the key things that stuck with me from that book was the need for a feeling of safety. Humans desire a feeling of safety. So if you think about it in the context of leadership, being able to provide the people that you work with and that work under you, that feeling of security and safety allows for them to build that trust and commitment towards you, the vision that you have, the vision of the company, and be willing to kind of go the extra mile, assuming that they don't feel like things are in jeopardy, for them personally. So, that was a big takeaway from that book.
100%. And yeah, he's got some great content out there. And certainly, well, if you haven't heard of Simon Sinek and you're listening to this podcast, I'd be really surprised. But if you haven't, Google it and check it out. All right. Next question here. Who should we be listening to?
Ooh, that's a good one. Me? No. I would throw this one. I don't know if this counts. But I would say your customers, whoever they are. So for me, I talk to, recruiters. My team talks to recruiters nearly daily, hopefully daily, in understanding what their pain points, what those needs are. For a lot of the listeners, I have to assume like your customers are the people that you work with or work alongside of every day. The other piece would be data. So I think data can sometimes be misleading, but also data can help inform new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things, new approaches, like what Qualifi has to offer in terms of, like I was saying before, some people are leery of virtual experiences, for instance, or automated experiences, but data can suggest otherwise. So listen to your customers, listen to data to help kind of guide your decisions and how you think about things.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's the first time anybody's answered data to that question. So, no, I mean, you come from a finance
I don't listen to a ton of maybe podcasts, so maybe I just cheated that answer a little bit.
That's all good. No, and it's an intentionally vague question. I mean, I am in human resources, so I love the gray, right? So that's the point. So perfect. All right, last question. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, you can visit our website. It's Qualifi, spelled with an I instead of a Y. You can find us at qualifi.hr. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Darrian Mikell, Mikell. I should be really easy to find there in a quick search, but would love to connect with you there.
Absolutely. And we'll have all that information in the show notes, so check it out. Really appreciate the approach here, Darrian. I think definitely a problem that we've all faced in the world of recruiting, and appreciate you helping it make our lives a little bit easier. So
absolutely.
Thanks for the time today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I love this.
All right. Take care, and take care of those kids.
Yeah. You as well.
Thanks.
All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.